Hello everybody, I am Katy Neale from Bournemouth Physio. It is lovely to see so many of you have joined in with our Zoom session today, and I know a few of you are going to be joining us on Facebook Live. This is my clinic in Bournemouth, and today is one of our running sessions. It's a really important topic and it's about pain and running specifically. However, quite a bit of this content can be kind of crossed with other sports, so taking some of the ideas about training and rehab and recovery, you could sit there and think about other sports that you may do, other activities that you may do, and use the advice. So today I am joined by Gemma Bitaraf, the running coach, who's absolutely incredible, and we have really enjoyed putting this session together this week. It is one of those double-edged swords, pain when you're running. The biggest passion that we have is to prevent people having injuries, although some people don't necessarily see that as a physio role. They tend to see us after they become injured. But one of the biggest things that I'm passionate about is injury prevention. If you don't have to come and see me, that's brilliant. If I know that you can be doing the exercise that you love to do, doing the activity that you love to do, that makes me really, really, really happy. Gemma, again, as a running coach, really wants to enable you to keep running and keep doing your sport. So today's session is going to be divided into two parts. One really from Gemma as the run coach perspective, talking about things that you can do, hopefully, to stop the injury happening, things that you can think about. We're then going to come back to me as the physio, and we're going to be talking about what happens from my end, what happens when people are injured, progression back to running, and take it from there. At the end of the session, so right after that, we're going to be doing another teach on our glute muscles. For those of you that joined in last week or watched the video that is uploaded, we talked about strength and conditioning as a key part of injury prevention, and we focus specifically on a teach on our hip abductor muscles. Today we're going to be focusing on a very specific teach about our glute muscles and really showing you how to activate them and be really aware, because a lot of us kind of tune in online, pick 20 exercises that we can do, but maybe we're not activating the right muscle. And that was brought to us by someone who joined in our sessions, and they asked us to do something very specific, and it's been an absolute pleasure to add something on that our audience has requested. So I'm going to hand over to Gemma now, and she'll take it from here.
Thanks, Katy. Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. I know it's another lovely day outside, actually, so it's great that you've taken the time to do this. For those of you who don't know me, I am a qualified England athletics coach, and I've been coaching as one of the head coaches at Gade Valley for almost 10 years now, actually. I work with groups of people from beginners to competitive runners. My focus is really helping runners understand their training and how they can influence their goals, whether that's performance or health related. I love working with Katy and other professionals to kind of give runners this all-round experience and help them through their training journey, whether it's working on a couch to 5K, or I work quite a lot with marathon runners. Katy, I'm just checking the view is correct, because I can see your treadmill rather than me. Sorry to interrupt everyone. Can everyone see me okay before we go on? Okay, I'll carry on, it's fine. Okay, so today we've got lots of you on this. I was excited to talk about this topic, actually. I'm not sure why, and I guess it must be quite prevalent in runners, and that's why we've got so many of you on today. I can pretty much guarantee that as a runner, you've been in some sort of pain, either during or maybe after your run, and probably more than you'd like to admit to, actually. It's hardly surprising. We talked about some of this last week. So remember, during one of your 45-minute runs, you take just over 8,000 foot strikes. And for each of those foot strikes, your ground force reaction is 2.5 to 3 times your body weight. Have a think about how much you weigh, times that by 3. Each time your foot contacts the ground, that's how much force is going through your body. it's unsurprising then that we end up in some sort of pain sometimes. So, you know, we're dealing with quite a lot when we're running. This pain is actually prevalent before injury. So the purposes of today, we're going to class injury as something which stops you from running, and the pain which is the point before that. And we ideally want to stop even the pain existing, but we realise that sometimes it does. You might be interested to know that there was a study completed of elite marathon runners. Actually, these studies tend to only be for elites, but 3/4 of them who competed at this elite level reported some sort of running related pain on the start line, so before they even started their marathon. And again, some of you will know this from last week, but there's a 70 to 80% chance as a runner that you will be injured within a year. So as professionals, Katie, myself, other people we work with, we want to try and reduce the instances of that occurring, ideally to 0, to none at all, not be injured. But we do recognise that it will happen, and we need to help you implement some strategies to deal with that. So today, hopefully, we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail. Now, to start with, despite what I just told you, it's never okay to run whilst you're in pain. And to clarify, we're talking about pain in your muscles and your joints rather than the fact that you've just run your fastest mile and you might say to me, oh, I feel so much pain. We're talking about pain, and hopefully you know the difference there. Very occasionally, Katie and I might see runners with injuries where they are allowed to run with some level of pain, but we give some very specific guidance around that, and we've got a case study I'll share with you later. I also can't think of any instance where running improved your pain level. This is quite different to maybe when you've had heavy legs or what we might call DOMs, where there might be some, it's mostly psychological actually, benefit to a gentle run. But there is no other instance where running improved your pain level, just despite what I hear runners say to me all the time. Hopefully, we're all intelligent enough, or running intelligent enough, to know when we're experiencing pain that's over and above the norm. And yet still, time and time again, myself included, we continue to ignore this. So very best case, we might take a day or 2 off running. Worst case, it does lead to significant injury where we might not be able to run for many days, weeks, or even months. For some reason, this is quite easily forgotten actually. When we're running, everything's going well, we're hitting those PBs, we're not in pain, and we forget that actually if we ignore this pain, it can stop us in our tracks. We won't be able to run at all. I believe though that as a runner, if you have had any significant time off due to injury, you are more likely to recognise this pain at the very lowest level, but it's still not always the case. Again, we easily forget it. So I try and work with runners to increase what I might call, or improve their running intelligence. So just because you can run fast, you can do a certain amount of reps, doesn't mean you're an intelligent runner. What I want is you to be able to recognise some symptoms before they become pain and before they cause any significant impact to your training. If you become one of these runners, so really intelligent, an intelligent runner, you actually have the potential to be better than the next person who doesn't understand that. So that person may be quicker than you at something, they may be able to run further, but if they don't recognise pain at that lowest level, they'll be stopped in their tracks. You will be able to carry on your training. And again, we talked about this last week with strength and conditioning. The less pain you're in, therefore less injury, we hope, more consistent training, and therefore your performance will improve. If you remain pain or injury free for 6 months, your performance definitely will increase. I can guarantee that. And that's actually much easier to implement than any sort of training intervention that I might give you that may or may not lead to performance increase. So, sorry, just think about that. Staying pain-free for 6 months rather than trying to implement some sort of complicated training program for 6 months, you'll actually be better off. Now, how can we start to recognise those signs of pain? So there's things that happen to us just before we feel pain. And if we get really good at tracking them, it means we can adjust our training before we start to feel that pain. So things we can track are energy levels. So again, are you intelligent enough to know the difference between when you just need to, you've had a bad day, you just need to get on with your run, it's more of a mindset thing. And when you're truly really lacking in energy and you do need to take a break and scale it back. How's your sleep quality? How are you sleeping? Running causes lots of different hormones to be elevated, and if we have trouble sleeping, we're fatigued. If we're already fatigued, there's a much higher chance of us experiencing pain when we run. Muscle soreness. So we talked last week about some overload in our muscles being necessary for our bodies to adapt and grow. But anything that's continued, so more than 24 hours of soreness, is a key marker for when this might turn into pain. And motivation to train, this is actually quite a big one and something really only you've got a handle on. I can't, as a coach, I can't judge that for you. How motivated are you to go out for that run? Do you really feel like you're going to hit those times or those markers, distance markers? And if not, if you're just not feeling it, that again might be a sign that you need to take a break or scale things back. Other markers that we look for are a low mood, increased resting heart rate, a reduced performance, I'll come on to this, and any illnesses, so colds, throat infections, etc. You might be quite interested to know that during a study, athletes reported some of these symptoms, these negative symptoms above from that list, up to 4 weeks before they actually reported pain. So it's quite important to track these on a much longer term or continual basis. I've spoken about it before and I will continue to say it's one of the most important aspects of your training is a running diary. I've mentioned it in most of the sessions. I also said that you can use it to write down whatever you want, but actually if you started to systematically include notes or scores against those areas that I talked about, then you could start to build a picture of when you're more likely to experience pain, which is obviously, as we know, the precursor for injury. Now, if we start to see any negative scores on any of those things I talked about above, so your sleep, your heart rate, your motivation, there are things we can do, and we're going to call it sort of managing our load. So usually what happens is someone comes to me, they say, I'm feeling tired, I'm not hitting my times, I'm not really that motivated to go for a run. I know, I think I'll go and train some more. I'll train harder, I'll do some more stuff. No, that is not the way forward. Instead, we can manage our load while we're able to and before this pain or injury even occurs. So think practically, would you rather change, I didn't say reduce, I just mean change your training, or wait till it's too late, you're in pain and you have to stop running completely? You need to change it, change your load before that decision is taken away from you. So when the pain is so high, you can't run at all. This actually makes you a better runner than continuing to train through the pain. So things we can change. We can change our training volume. So you might like the structure of running a certain amount of times per week. You can still do that, but you may need to reduce the distance or the time that you run on each of those days. Your training intensity, similar to the above, you really like the structure of running a certain amount of times per week or a set distance, but now you have to lower the intensity, so that may be no hills, no speed work. You can change your training type, linked to the above again, but an example, instead of running on the road, you could do some off-road sessions, and actually making a change to your shoes is a different way of loading our bodies, and that reduces some of this stress as well. We could do some cross-training. So this falls into two parts: cross-training cardio, so you still want to train those number of days, you still want to do your cardio stuff, but you've swapped some of your runs for another type of training. So that might be some gym classes, some cycling, some swimming. You might swap some of your runs for some non-cardio cross-training. Much harder for runners, I think, this one, but you could swap it in for some yoga or some Pilates. Now, I didn't mention strength and conditioning because I'm assuming that you all attended last week and you're doing your strength and conditioning sessions anyway. But if you are, and you're great and you do those, you could maybe, this is a time when you could increase them if you need to decrease your running volume. And recovery, this is something we can change. It really may need to be prioritised, and you might need to take more recovery days or pay more attention to your nutrition, hydration, or your sleep. Now, all of these factors are actually important prior to us being in pain. And as a runner, this is a really practical thing. You need to be able to readily switch up your training and be prepared to do this. So there's no point ignoring it and saying, I'm never going to be in pain, I'm not going to do it, it's not going to happen. And if I am, I don't really know what to do about it. You need to be ready for this. What will I do if I'm in pain? How can I change my training? So a great example, many runners, I am definitely included in this, we get some pain, we head for the swimming pool. Great, excellent. It's not weight bearing, it may definitely help to reduce your pain. It gives you that exercise fix, but it's a bit of a faff, isn't it? You've lost your membership card, it's not particularly motivating to go for a swim, and once you're there, you're not really sure what you're doing. Is it really benefiting your running? But if you were to swim or put in some swim sessions, maybe just once a week or once every 2 weeks, if you were in pain when you were running and you had to go to the swimming pool, it would be much less of a faff and you would just get on with it, and it would be part of your training program. It wouldn't be this thing that you do when you're in pain for a short period of time and you don't really understand it or enjoy it. So make these different types of managing your load part of your run program. And I think it's really important, you have to be prepared to implement them at almost a moment's notice so that you can carry on training and get that buzz that you'll love from training. Another important aspect of managing pain or managing the point before pain is working with professionals. I wouldn't normally advocate this so strongly, but lots of times we see runners who have left it too late to come and see us. They continue to run whilst they're in pain, and actually they ended up with quite significant injuries. At worst case, they ran through that pain. I absolutely understand why people won't go and see a professional. It may be a physio, it may be a coach, it may be a chiropractor. One of them might be money or finance. They do cost money, and we do recognise that. But also I think some of that is around, you might be worried that we're going to stop you running. I mentioned this before and Katie said it lots of times. Wherever possible, we really try and keep you running. It's actually in our interest, because there's no point in us stopping you running. We reduce your pain, we start you running again, and then you have to come back to us in a number of weeks because you've got the same problem. That's not really in our interest and not what we want to do. Our aim is to keep you running whilst managing the pain. So it might take a bit longer to resolve, and we will always give you the option to stop, but it does mean you can continue to do what you love, which is running, and we can monitor how that running is affecting your pain. The sooner you can visit someone, potentially the less you'll have to visit them, and that could be anybody. They're not only experts in diagnosing why you might experience the pain. I always think it's a bit better, you always feel better when you know why you've got the pain instead of just wondering or guessing. And they're actually expert in how you can adjust your training. So I've given you lots of strategies today, but professionals can really help you with that and keep you running. I was thinking about how many times we've been in pain, we've had various discussions with ourselves, with our friends, our running friends. Someone thinks it might be something, someone else thinks it might be someone else. Use a professional, even if you just spark up an email conversation with them, and they can probably help you. Doesn't need to be a physio. As I said, I actually see a lady once a month. She doesn't know anything about running or sport, but she's really clued into my body and how things may have changed since last time I saw her. And she just kind of sparks something in my mind. She might say, oh, that your calf's a bit tight, and it might remind me that a few weeks ago I had a rep session, I had pushed it a bit, and when I got home I was feeling something, and that might just remind me to manage my load a bit for the next 2 weeks so that it doesn't turn into injury. So whilst we're in pain, we really want to maintain some structure. Runners, especially if you're part of a club or you're working towards an event, are really used to having structure in our lives, and when we're in pain or unfortunately injured, that structure's disrupted, and there's often sort of no exact timeline or journey to return to normal running. That's really hard mentally. You just feel a bit lost, really. You're not sure what to do. But there's no reason why we can't create structure around the things we can do. And it's likely, if you've seen someone like myself or Katie or anyone really, they would have given you some specific things you can do to help reduce your pain, but they can also give you some boundaries around your running. So I've got an example. Myself and Katie recently treated a runner with, I'm going to call it an IT band injury. Generally, they don't involve any torn or pulled muscles, but it tends to be an overuse injury. So Katie was able to advise the runner on some specific exercises they could do, and I could create a training plan around what they were able to do. And it might be more than you think, actually. So the criteria we gave them was the specific exercises we give you must be done on a daily basis. You are allowed to run, but a pain level between 0 and 2 out of 10. If this pain increases, stop immediately. You are allowed to run as fast as you like. They like that, that's good. You are not allowed to run up or down hills. You must include rest days and cross training, and you must maintain your strength training. Now, in reality, that actually meant that runner with an ITB injury, their weekly program included a speed session, so they could do short reps, static recovery where they stood still. They were allowed to do a tempo run, but only around a 1 kilometre route, so they could be close to home if needed, if that pain level increased. And they were also allowed to do their long run, but they had to break it down into 10 minutes of running and 2 minutes of walking. And at all times, I say, staying quite close to home, and that's particularly prevalent at the moment, actually, in case you need to stop. So within 4 weeks, that runner saw an improvement in their pain levels and only a small drop in their performance. And they could actually return back to running within 6 weeks. If that particular person, and those who have had ITB issues might recognise this, left it, say, another 2 weeks to see us, it's likely their pain level would have gone to a 7 or 8 out of 10. We would have had to advise them to stop running completely and put them on one of the protocols I mentioned above a lot later, so almost 2 weeks to a month later. And that would have put them quite far back in their training. So you can see it doesn't need to be as part of seeing Katie or myself or anybody, but you can adjust your load before it's too late and that decision's taken away from you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So other things we can do when we're in pain, but more likely talking about injury now, just to still feel involved with your runners. So lots of runners tell me they really like running because of the social side. They love running because they get to see everyone else. Again, at the moment, I know that's hard actually, but in times to come it will improve. So if you're in pain or you're injured, that social side doesn't need to stop. And quite unexpectedly, it could give you a similar buzz. Examples might include volunteering at your local club, park run or a race. And if you can still run, if you're still allowed to run, but you've got some boundaries that we've put on you, then maybe you could offer to pace another runner or help someone if they're a beginner on their couch to 5K. It may be just that you offer to make coffee and cakes ready at the end of a run. And do remember, if you're in pain, if you're not in pain, think back to a time when you were and how difficult that was, and how it's quite important to support those people who are. It's really difficult when you're in pain and you can't run, or your running is reduced. I also wanted to note, I know I've got quite a few of you today who have come from a club or maybe a group of friends. I think it's quite important to create a culture where it's okay to stop running if you're in pain. I was thinking I can't count the number of times where runners come to me during a rep session. They don't say I'm in pain, but they disguise it. They say something like, "Oh, I can just feel my hamstring. It's a little bit tight. Should I carry on?" They should know by now. My answer will always be no. Runners quite tenacious actually, and the next day I'll get a message, "Do you think I can run tomorrow?" My answer will still be no. But I will say to them, if you're out of pain by the weekend, it might be possible that you can do your long run. But we're going to break it down. We're going to make sure that you do loops, you stay close to home. And if that goes okay, maybe next week you could return to your rep session, but again, we will scale it back. That's so much more preferable than carrying on in pain, then struggling through your next run, and then actually you have to take 2 weeks off because you've just continued to run. So say you've managed your load brilliantly, you're looking to return to some sort of normal running, and there will be a point when that happens. Actually, the point of the end of pain is not necessarily the end of an injury. So you're actually at highest risk of developing pain again within the first 3 months of starting to return to normal running. And you have to remember that usually we think we're out of pain, that's it, I'm going to run, I'm going to do everything as I did before. We need to probably have a transition period. So don't see this transition period as wasted time. Don't ditch all the great things that you were doing. So you were going to the pool, you were doing some cross training. Those need to stay in your program for quite a long time and probably forever actually to an extent, so that you don't end up being in pain again, which we've talked about. It's quite mentally tough. It will always feel more positive to complete a run slower or shorter than pushing through that pain level and having pain afterwards. I know it doesn't seem like it at the time, but you will always regret it afterwards. So use the transition period when you are out of pain, but you're not quite back to normal running, to just develop your running skills and build your fitness back up. So as I said, you may still spend a fair amount of time cross-training, but now maybe you could do some drills or you could build up slowly. So we put injured runners, even quite competitive runners, on a couch to 5K program when they return from pain or injury. Keep track of your running, even if it feels like you're not doing the sessions that you would normally do. It's still relevant to track everything. Now, sometimes this makes, unfortunately, a change to our training plan. So maybe, again, I know it's not relevant at the moment, but it will be in the future. You train for something, you'd entered a specific race or a distance that you want to complete. This pain has stopped you and you've had to change your training, and it's just not going to be possible to make that event. So maybe use the opportunity to develop an area of your running that you wouldn't normally have concentrated on. I know a definite example of this is a 5K and a 10K. Actually, 10K is a really hard distance to train for, and we probably don't train for it enough. There's no such event that's harder than another. Training for a 5K PB, it takes just as much dedication as training for a marathon. It's just different, just feels differently. So there'll always be an opportunity to do something different if you're injured or in pain. Don't see it as the end of your training program. So in summary, it's never okay to run in pain, and it is definitely okay to stop as soon as you experience that pain, and actually in the longer term it's more beneficial. Take the time to develop your running intelligence, I'm going to say, so that you can recognise the first signs of pain that might lead to injury, and even better, develop those factors that might lead to pain in the first place. Be prepared, so in all ways, practically, physically and emotionally, to implement those different elements into your running. So when we talked about the swimming example, so that we can manage our load and avoid pain in the first place. And I wrote this down: be brave. So make some clever decisions about stopping running before you're forced to, before someone like myself or Katie comes along and says that you can't run because you're at quite serious risk of injury. Work with someone you trust. It might be a professional, but it may just be a friend or a colleague, or someone has more experience in running than you do. So they can help you recognise some symptoms that might lead to pain. Wherever possible, try and maintain some structure in your training. Even if it's not your normal training, do try and maintain structure. And I think your running, I always call it your running brain, will really thank you for that. Get involved in areas of running that as a runner you don't always have the opportunity to. So supporting others, for instance, if you can't do your normal running. And don't be in a rush to get out of pain. Recognise that it takes time sometimes. You often don't have any influence on how long that takes, but there are some things that you can influence and that will help you along the way. And also be prepared to change your focus, and don't see it as a bad thing. It can be a benefit in the long term. I think that's it. Katie's ready for a discussion on injury, I think, and some teach as well. I went through quite a few things, and if there's any questions afterwards, we can chat more specifically, especially if you're in pain at the moment. But I will hand over to Katie, and I'll speak with you all later. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you so much, Gemma. That is an incredible amount of knowledge. If you look in the chat, for those of you on Zoom, I've tried to summarise it as we're going along. So to tell you a little bit more about me specifically, I'm a physio with over 18 years experience. As I said at the intro, one of my passions is health, wellness, injury prevention, and also if someone is injured, to try and get them out of injury as quickly as possible and to give them tools to prevent it, to prevent them coming back to physio, which seems a bit crazy because this is my business. But actually I would rather people are well and happy than knocking on my door every single day and had enough knowledge and enough teach to be able to get them back to what they want to do and to stay injury free. At Borehamwood Physio, we're part of Physio Academy, and I am one of a series, a few of us, we have run clinics. And the reason the run clinic developed, it came up by Glenn and Benoit, who put on running courses. And we try and take people who aren't injured, and we look at them, and we look at their running, and we look at their style, and we look at their strength and conditioning, and some of their flexibility, some key markers that is all evidence-based. And like Gemma says, we try and give you tools to help prevent having any problems as you're going along. The run clinic is also really useful for people who are injured. We just use it in a slightly different way, and over the course of your recovery before you go back to running, we will do exactly the same screen as well to make sure that you're okay. So what happens from a physio point of view? Most people, 90% of people, rock up to physio with quite a significant injury. And a lot of the time during the conversation, the penny drops and they just go, why didn't I come and see you sooner? And I think Gemma kind of alluded to these two things. I think first of all, absolutely recognise that there is a financial component when coming to see a private physio. I also think on reflection, this was a story that I heard. I was kind of in my gym over kind of listening to two guys talking, and one had started to see a physio for an injury, and he actually said, do you know what, if the amount I spend on having a massage weekly, he was having a massage weekly, the amount I spend on going out for dinner, the amount I spend on a new pair of trainers, the amount I spend on this and this, had I actually just spent that money on seeing the physio right at the start, once or twice, then I probably wouldn't be having to spend as much money as I am now. So finance is definitely a factor, and fear that we're going to tell you to stop running. So the majority of people who turn up at physio have quite a significant injury, and the common injuries that we see for runners are foot pain. That can be something called plantar fasciitis, shin pain, and there are two different levels of shin pain. There is medial tibial stress syndrome, or there is some stress fractures which we have to be quite careful about. Knee pain, lots of different types of knee pain that people can get. I'm sure you've heard of runner's knees. Strained muscles, so calf muscles, hamstrings. Sometimes people get tight in the front of their hip. Low back is actually quite common. And Achilles tendon problems. And depending on when people come to see you, the management for that individual can be very different. So you can have 3 people who are reporting the same area and the same presentation, but if someone actually comes to see me, like Gemma says, right at the start, so they're just getting the tiniest bit of a niggle, their management is going to be very different from the person that has trained all the way through it and now can just about walk up the stairs. And as part of physio, we kind of assess everybody as an individual. There are so many factors to do with why that person has got injured. And the thing to remember is running is not the only thing that may cause your injury. So let's imagine you've been out running and over a bit of time you've developed knee pain. And you're kind of thinking, well, okay, maybe I have kind of listened to Gemma's talk and I've decided to modify some things to see if that will help. And it's helped a little bit, but you've not considered factors outside of running. So maybe you've reduced that, but if you imagine it's your knee, what happens if you spent the last 2 weekends doing loads of DIY, lots of crouching, lots of kneeling? The same kind of with kind of Achilles, ankle problems. Maybe again, you've done a bit of a reduction because you've kind of thought that you must do that, but maybe you're a woman and you've gone out and you've worn kind of different shoes and that's flared it up. So the whole point when you're starting to have an injury and starting to have a niggle is to not only think about what's going on in your run training, but also to start looking at the wider picture. What is possibly going on day to day in your life that could be maintaining that injury and that you can think about? And with the physio, people get a little bit frustrated sometimes. They come in and we sit down and we chat for about 20 minutes. And all of these questions are because everything is multifactorial. My job as a physio is to really help you understand what's going on. The more we can get control of the situation, the quicker that you can go back to running. So you already thought about all those things that are potentially triggering your pain, then you can sit down and you can have a really quick recovery. Hopefully that's the drill. So during a physio session, what we do is we screen your ability. So just imagine you've just got the slightest twinge. You can walk pain-free, you can do your day-to-day activities pain-free. You would probably come into the session, we'd do some tests and what you would think of as exercise specific to your injury. And then the other thing that's really important to do is to do some higher level tests where we load your body akin to what you would be doing when you're running. So think about jumps and hops and squats and dips with the knee. And if you could do that, even if you have a little twinge, I would look at the reason for the twinge. And as Gemma said, we'd probably be able to keep you running alongside a rehabilitation program that's going to maintain what you do. The other extreme is the person who is in pain during what we call activities of daily living. So day-to-day things. If you are just about hobbling up my stairs to come to my clinic, if you know that you can't walk pain-free, or that even after an hour you're getting sore, the reality is I am probably going to ask you to kind of really cut back running or even stop running. And that is the last thing that I want to do. But one of the guidance to running is if you're not pain-free day to day, that's the ideal. If you're not pain-free day to day, the load, as Gemma talks about, 2.5 times your body weight as you run is not going to enable you to kind of have that recovery really quickly. And it's very sad as a physio because you know sometimes you're going to say this, and I can see, you can imagine the positive, happy reaction I get from all my runners when I say to them, I'm really, really sorry, but you kind of have to stop. And I think deep down they know that. And then the other thing is if I suggest swimming, I'd say 50% of my runners are very unhappy when I suggest swimming as a form of cross-training, but it is something that can be done. And if you come to see a physio quite flexible, quite open, and just think, actually, this physio really wants to keep me active, maybe I'm going to do some cross training, maybe I'm going to do some strength and conditioning, and short term, I'm just going to compromise on what I'm doing in terms of the running part of my exercise, then I'm going to be back to my sport at the quickest time possible. Why do people keep cycling back? So let me take a calf injury. So this is really common. Someone comes in, and you can apply this to lots of different injuries. So someone finally turns up to physio, and their story is that they were fine. They don't seem to recall any of the things that Gemma was saying. They don't seem to recall a build-up. They don't seem to recall changes in those factors, and maybe if they kept a diary, there would be something. All they think about is that they went out for a run one day and they felt their calf go. They pulled their calf muscle. And it could be an acute injury. It could be completely acute with no build-up. And they were sensible. They said that they rested it for a week and it felt so much better. And then they went off running again. And then 2 days later, it got sore. So they rested it for another week. And then they went out running again. And then it got sore. And this pattern can actually keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And a lot of what happens is that people aren't aware that when they injure a muscle, it actually can take a little bit longer than a week. And even the rest component that is really important to settle down any acute inflammation, there needs to be recovery and rehabilitation to build that strength of that muscle up again. So as part of physio, the first aim is to allow the injury to settle to make sure that you are pain-free, but then to check the capacity of the muscle, the strength. So imagine a calf, you settled it down, you can walk now pain-free, but you're kind of noticing a little bit of fatigue, a bit of tiredness, a bit of an ache by the end of the day. And I look at an exercise called a calf raise where I'm getting you up and down on your tiptoes. And we notice that your good side can do 20 to 30, but the side that had an injury can only do 5 or 6. You can imagine that when you're going out running and landing on that leg, that muscle doesn't have the capacity. So to summarize what I've just said so far, it's really important to come to physio if you're struggling with getting better, even if it's a niggle, even if you've just tried all the things that Gemma has suggested. We would rather that you don't wait till you're in really acute pain if it's been something that's building up. Obviously, if you've just had an acute injury, that's something that's slightly different. Our goal as a physio is to get you back to running as soon as possible. And we do things such as run clinics and run screenings. And when you come and see the physio, we will be asking you to do some cross training, some strength and conditioning, and we will make it injury specific to you. There isn't one set formula. So you may have a friend, and this is also very important, don't compare yourself to anyone else. Really don't compare yourself to anyone else. Even if you think what you do with running is similar to your friends, as I said right at the start, what's going on in your day-to-day life is going to be very, very different. So what happens if you both had a calf injury, but one of you has a job where you're standing all day and one of you has a job that's sitting? Your recovery is going to be really different. What happens if you have a knee injury, but you've got little kids, so you're bending up and down, versus the person that lives by themselves and can take quite a lot of control? So please don't compare yourself to anyone else. Be open to suggestions about cross-training and understand that the physio wants to get you back as soon as possible. Gemma started to talk about pain. And so, as I said, in an ideal world, we want no pain before we get you back to running. However, we will normally accept pain between 0, so there's a pain score, because I think explain this. 0 is no pain, 10 out of 10 is horrific pain. So we really want pain kind of at that 0 to 2, occasionally 0 to 3 level, and it's not allowed to go above that when you're running. I will be honest and say that can change a little bit depending on the person. So this is a guidance, it's not 100% specific for everyone. And we need that pain to definitely settle within 24 hours. And actually in some cases, I will say within 5 minutes of stopping your activity, that pain should stop. And not only should the pain stop, and I don't want it to be worse the next day. There's some injuries that we have that feel fine at the time, but the next morning someone's kind of limping around. That is still counted as pain. kind of within the 24 hours, and that isn't acceptable for a recovery. What we want to ensure is that someone is gradually pacing themselves back through working with a run coach, working with myself, so that their pain levels are minimum. They're not having pain after 24 hours. And as I said, for some instances, within 5 minutes, it needs to stop. And that they're progressing. So think about this pyramid where you've got your ability to run, building up with kind of your strength conditioning, your rehab, and your settling down. The other thing to say when you're going back to running is the screening test that we do. If you know in your heart you can't jump, you can't hop, you can't squat, you can't do dips on the side that you're injured, be honest with yourself and think, what is the reality of running? And I'm probably going to feel really sore and I'm going to injure myself more. If you go out and you run and very quickly the pain is building up more than 2 out of 10, it can be very, very difficult, but that is the point where you have to stop. And it's worth it. And I can think of loads of patients that I've worked with that we've gone round in circles for 4 weeks till I've really got them to manage their symptoms. And understandably, they've been super frustrated because they've tried to keep going, they've tried to keep going, they've tried to keep going. And 6 weeks later, they finally stop and come into the program. And within 6 weeks, they start to get better. So for all those weeks you delay the recovery, you're actually not progressing in your running. When we come back to that 2 out of 10 pain when you run, the only other thing to think about is what is the quality of your running? And I know this seems a bit silly, but some people come up to me and say, oh yeah, Katie, I'm not, it's only 2 out of 10. And I then have a look at them, I put them on my treadmill. And the reason it's 2 out of 10 is because they're kind of limping, or they're changing their movement, or they're being really protective. So just to go through that again, if you're returning to running, your pain should be at a low level. It should fade within 24 hours. As I said, in some cases, 5 minutes. There shouldn't be pain the next day, shouldn't be waking with pain. And you should have a normal running pattern. You shouldn't be compensating for it. And it's also important to really think, is the risk of carrying on worth the recovery it's going to take? Or is it better to go and get that injury looked at because you've tried everything within your knowledge bank and it's not improving, and you would rather come and see someone sooner and maybe just go in for 1 or 2 sessions and be able to continue? The common mistakes people make are being scared to go and get advice, being worried they don't know enough, comparing themselves to others, not realising that you need rehab as well as rest to try and progress back to sport. So I'm just going to hand over to Gemma just for 30 seconds just to see if there's anything else she wants to add, and then I'm going to get set up for the teach about the glute exercises. Gemma, anything?
Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't prepared for that. Yeah. Should have been it. No, nothing to add actually. Katie's right. It does seem like we spent a fair amount of time then talking about physios and run coaches. We don't normally talk so much about that, but I think in this episode, I'm going to call it, it was quite important because you are able to use us in that way. We actually don't want you to use us all the time consistently. We want you to be out of pain and not running out of pain, or not being in pain in the first place. But there will be a place or a time when you've used all of your knowledge that you've got and you're still in pain and you need to come and visit us or another professional. I think Katie's ready. We've got some time for Q&A at the end for my part and for Katie's as well, but she's going to give you a quick glute exercise now. It was requested last week. Thanks, Katie.
Hi guys, this is the weird point where I kind of talk to you lying down, and it feels very bizarre, and I want to echo what Gemma says. Yeah, this is very specific, talking about running and physios, because we're assuming that you've got to the point in that last part of the talk where you're not managing, and that's when you need to see a health professional. So we're going to just do a really quick teach on our glute exercises, and as I said at the start, this builds up as part of the strength and conditioning. This is a really amazing thing to do as prevention. What I alluded to at the start is that there are loads of places that you can go online and find glute exercises. I don't think I'm going to show you an exercise that you've never seen before, but I want you to be thinking about when you do an exercise, are you activating the right muscle? That's probably a bit of a passion of mine. I'm a Pilates teacher as well, and I see a lot of people come in, not necessarily in a physio context, but it's a Pilates context where they don't have injuries, and they show me that they've been doing loads of exercises, and I say, well, where are you feeling it? And they point to a body part that's nothing to do with that exercise. So last week there is a teach on our hip abductor muscle. Feel free to have a watch of that if you want. And I'm going to go through what they can call the hip thrust. I call it the bridge in Pilates. The good thing about this exercise is there's been quite a lot of research that has shown that this is a really great exercise to activate the glutes. As always, this is just one part of a bigger glute program. And your glutes, your posterior chain, are really important in helping prevent injuries for running. So I'm going to have a lie down on my back. So the first thing to think about is your head support. I'm going to just have one little head block. And you want to think about having your feet, knees, hip width apart. And I'm just going to show you the basic bridge. So the basic bridge is kind of lifting your back up off the mat. And then coming back down. And I'll do that again. You're just going to lift up off the mat and come back down. Now, if you're very strong in your glutes, you're not going to feel your glutes, that burn that you associate with a muscle, after you've done 2 little reps. However, what you are going to be aware of is if you're feeling it in your knees, in your thighs, or in your back, and that is something that we don't want to happen. This exercise is specific for our glutes, which are our bottom muscles, so the rest of our body really shouldn't be kicking in. Even if you're strong, you should be aware of some tightening through your bottom as you lift up. And if you're not sure, you can just gently rest your hands on the muscle group and you should feel them tightening. Now, if it was as simple as that, I wouldn't have a job as a Pilates teacher or as a physio. We're all built slightly differently. So if you're doing this exercise, and what do they call it now? These are hacks. So if you're doing this exercise and you've done it a few times and you're like, I really don't think my bottom's doing anything, I can feel it in my knees. Let's start off with a simple thing. So we're going to work from our feet up. So the first thing that you can do, a trick that sometimes helps, is thinking about putting a bit more pressure through your heels rather than the whole foot. So you could come up into bridge. You don't have to lift your feet up, but you can think about just pressing into the heels a little bit more, tuning your awareness to the bottom, and see if that helps your activation. And then go down, putting a bit more pressure through the heels, lifting up, and then see if that helps. Remember, I'm going to show you all of these different things to add on, and you may find that you have to do a combination of them, not one at a time. The next thing to think about is your knee position. Generally, too close to the bottom doesn't feel very comfortable, and quite far away actually ends up working the back of our legs. So just check, and just have a check of your knee position, and then think about where they are and make sure that that's in a comfortable spot. We're going to come on to the pelvis now. So there is something that's very important here. We really want to make sure that we're not very dominant in our back. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in an exercise. So if I just push up, my back is kind of quite relaxed. It's what we call neutral. If I go up, 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 can you see how I'm arching my back? And the problem there is I feel that in my small of my back. Yes, I can feel my bottom muscles as well, but I'm also feeling my back quite strongly. As I said at the start, we're really looking at getting the effort into the bottom, trying to release it. So it's really common that a lot of people just push too much with your back. And if you're one of those people, just think, soften. So lower down or relax the spine till it feels nice and relaxed. That doesn't mean dropping the hips. So watch that again. If I go too high, You can see my pelvis stays the same, but I'm just going to relax my back, take the pressure out and down. So that's feet, knees, kind of thinking about not overusing your back. We can now think about what we call the alignment of our knees. Are they in or are they out? And I'll show you 2 bits of kit that you can use to help with this. So the first thing is, as you come up, do your knees drift in quite a lot? Are you able to at least keep them hip width apart? And then check that. The other thing that you could think about is what happens if your knees drift gently out, not very far, but just gently out. Does that help fire those muscles at all? And come back. So I've got, just finishing off, I've got a band and a ball. And again, this is something that I play with. So some people, when they come into bridge, just popping something between the knees helps them activate their bottom. So if you're working through all those little tricks that I've shown and you're still not sure, grab a cushion, grab a pillow, double it up, pop it between the knees, have a feel, see if that helps you feel those muscles a little bit more. Maybe holding it for a few seconds, see if that helps fire those muscles rather than their hips and the knees and the back. The opposite thing is taking one of these circular resistance bands, popping them kind of around that thigh, coming up into bridge again, and just very gently pulling out into resistance. Does that help those muscles activate? And then once you've kind of identified what strategy works, and it could be you just can do a regular bridge with no strategy, but maybe you need to use the ball or the bands or think about the weight through the heels, make sure your back is relaxed. You can then use that for your variations. So if you're very weak, you would probably just come up and then down. As you get stronger, you can do holds. We can do what we call pulses. And then we get into things like when we're lifting our legs. But that's a kind of a different teach for another day because that looks at control. So I'll just slip this off. And I'll come up into standing. And hopefully that has helped you. Hopefully I know you maybe feel a bit sick as I move the camera. Just feel a little bit of a mess after that. So hopefully that's just shown you different ways that you can go home, you can watch that video again, and you can try those different adaptations of the exercise just to see what you do to isolate your glutes the most. So thank you so much for joining in today. I know it's been a bit of a full-on session. It's really lovely to see so many of you that have joined us. In the next coming weeks, I'm going to be doing things about balance drills, really important for control. We're talking about nutrition, we're talking about fuel, we're talking about other factors that can influence your running. We've got 2 more sessions left in the series. If there is anything specific that you want to see, you can always add that on the chat. This video is going to be uploaded to Facebook, to the YouTube page, Katy Neale Physio and Pilates. It's going to have my contact details on, it's going to have Gemma's contact details on. So it's been lovely for you to all join us today. I know for some of you, it would have been marathon day today, or kind of that really kind of big statement about what's going on in the world at the moment. Please look after yourself, please take care, please try and not have an injury, despite everything we've talked about in this session. And we will see you next week at 11 o'clock. Bye from me, Katy from Physio.